Alright everyone, today we are going to talk about a question that many people have asked for decades. Why does the Middle East never seem to have peace? Every few years, there is another war, another uprising, another crisis, another ceasefire that does not last, and people often ask the same question, why can't this conflict end? Now, when most people try to answer this question, they usually focus on one thing. Religion. They say the conflict exists because of religious differences. Jews versus Muslims, Sunni versus Shia, Islam versus the West. And religion is certainly part of the story. But if we stop the analysis there, we miss something very important. Because the Middle East conflict is not only about religion, it is also about geography. It is about history. It is about power. And most importantly, it is about structure. In fact, one of the reasons this conflict never ends is because the region itself is built in a way that makes conflict very hard to avoid. Whenever we study geopolitics, we must begin with the map, because geography shapes strategy. If you look at the Middle East on a world map, you notice something immediately. It's at the center of everything. To the west is Europe, to the east is Asia, to the south is Africa. For thousands of years, trade routes pass through this region, armies pass through this region, empires pass through this region. The Middle East has always been a crossroads, and crossroads are rarely peaceful. Because every major power wants control of them. If you control the Middle East, you control access between continents, you control trade routes, you control energy resources, you control strategic positions. This alone makes the region extremely important, but geography creates another problem. The Middle East does not have strong natural borders. In Europe, mountains and rivers often separate countries. In East Asia, oceans separate major powers. But in the Middle East, many borders are drawn across deserts and plains. This makes conflicts easier because there are few natural barriers to stop armies. And this brings us to the second problem, the borders themselves. Most of the modern Middle East was created after the First World War. Before that, much of the region was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, European powers divided the territory. Britain and France drew borders on maps, often without considering the people who lived there. Tribes that had fought for centuries were forced to share borders. Religious communities that did not trust each other suddenly became citizens of the same state. These borders created fragile countries, countries that required strong governments to survive. And when those governments became weak, conflict returned. We can see this pattern again and again: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. These states were not created naturally over time. They were created quickly by outside powers, and because of that, they have always been unstable. But unstable borders alone do not explain why the conflict never ends. To understand that, we must look at strategy. In international politics, there is a concept called the security dilemma. It works like this. When one country tries to make itself safer, other countries feel less safe. So they respond by building more weapons, which makes the first country feel threatened again, and the cycle continues. This creates a situation where no one wants war, but everyone prepares for war, and preparation itself makes war more likely. Israel feels surrounded. Iran feels threatened. Arab states fear each other. Turkey fears instability. Every country believes it must stay strong to survive, and very easy to destroy. This is why ceasefires often fail. This is why negotiations collapse. This is why even small incidents can turn into large conflicts. But there is one more factor that makes the Middle East different: outside powers. The Middle East is not only important to the people who live there, it is also important to the rest of the world: strategic waterways and key military positions. For decades, outside powers have been involved in the region: the United States, Russia, Europe, and now China. Each power has its own interests, each supports different allies, each tries to influence the balance of power. Sometimes this involvement prevents wars, but sometimes it makes conflicts last longer, because local disputes become part of global competition. And when global powers are involved, conflicts become harder to solve. Conflicts do not continue only because people hate each other. They continue because the structure of the system makes conflict likely. And unless that structure changes, the cycle can repeat again and again. This is why the Middle East conflict never seems to end, not because peace is impossible, but because the conditions for peace are very hard to create. So when people ask why the Middle East conflict never ends, they often look for a simple answer. They blame religion. They blame one country. They blame one leader. But history is rarely that simple. The reality is that the Middle East sits at the center of geography, history, and power. It is a crossroads of continents, a region with borders that were never meant to be stable, a place where every country feels insecure and every neighbor feels dangerous. And when fear becomes the normal condition of politics, conflict becomes very hard to escape. Even when leaders want peace, the structure of the system pushes them back toward confrontation. This is what we call a security dilemma, and the preparation itself makes war more likely. But it does mean peace requires more than agreements. It requires changing the conditions that create fear in the first place. So the Middle East conflict continues, not because people want endless war, but because history, geography, and strategy keep pulling the region back into the same cycle. And until those forces change, the question may not be why the conflict started. The real question is why it ever stops at all. All right, we will continue next time.